Yo, what up, Marvel Rival Gang, and anybody from the YouTube space seeing this video? Welcome to the channel. So, y'all more than likely clicked on this video due to the title, right? Or at least the thumbnail, Road Q. How do y'all feel about it? Let's talk about it. I'll go ahead and start with my 2 cents, and I'll say I'm not necessarily for Road Q because I think what makes Marvel Rivals fun at the end of the day is the chaoticness of you never know what you're going to get on a team, right? Now, from a casual aspect, cool. But it's when we get to the ranked aspect, and that's where I spend most of my time personally, right? When I get in ranked, and I usually pick DPS, and I can honestly play any role, right? But I choose to play DPS the most, right? If I could choose what I could queue up as or what I would prefer, it would definitely more than likely be DPS, tank, and then strategist, right? Now, I like what League of Legends has done over the years, right? Where you when you queue up, you pretty much pick what your best role is for the most part, right? Or you can just do flex, right? Which I think is a great option. I think that would be really great in Marvel Rivals somewhere down the road, if not sooner than later, because a lot of the issues right now in the game, yes, we do have character balancing, which needs to be addressed. But a lot of it is the players. Like a lot of the players, we don't want to be team players, right? You'll be in the middle of a game, and clearly, especially when it comes to the tanks, maybe the supports, and even the DPS, right? So I don't want to leave anybody out, right? You're not going to point fingers. But with that being said, that one change, meaning they switch to another character or potentially switch to another role, those are the determining factors from the very beginning of winning a game versus losing a game, right? Everything outside of that is really just going to be based on skill and, who can do what on the battlefield for the most part, right? So, when I see these things happen in a lot of my games, used to be I would look at the enemy team and be like, man, this person really stepped up and they carried their team. We lost, right? Because sometimes you're just going to have games where you lose based on that, right? That's competitive gaming in general. Somebody has to be on the losing end, somebody has to be on the winning end. But a lot of the times, it seems like when you're on the losing end, these were things that were self inflicted due to a lot of your teammates and potentially yourself, because sometimes people like to blame others. And then it's like, well, dude, if you made this switch, potentially this could have helped and, remedy the situation as well. So at the end of the day, this is why it is a team game. But to move forward with the conversation, as far as road queue, do I think it would be a benefit? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. With that being said, I'm going to show you guys a chart that I was able to develop, and it's going to go over some things as far as what road queue would even look like. All right. So these are the pros and cons for the most part, and it has an impact level between 1 and 5, right? Obviously, 1 being the lowest impact, 5 being the highest impact. So let's go ahead and start with the pros. So team balance guarantees essential roles every match. I think we all can agree that is great because now we know, for example, right? If it's 2 tanks, 2 DPS, 2 strategists across the board for each team, who's going to be mad at that? Now, again, we're going to just stick to the pros for now, and then we'll go to the cons, right? So let's just stick to the pros. So now we have match fairness. That's sitting at a 4.5. More skill based outcomes, right? So meaning once you select that role, you best be ready to perform to the highest of your ability because it's all on you, right? You can't blame somebody else that picked DPS and force you to switch or pick another role or anything like that. You signed up for DPS. You signed up for strategist. You signed up for Vanguard. You best be ready to fulfill whatever those duties are for those roles, right? You best be ready to switch between whatever characters that are in your bag so that way your team has a higher chance of success, right? So again, another pro, going back to really what I just said, clear responsibilities. Everybody knows their role, right? If you selected a specific role, we all hope that you pick that role because that is ultimately your best role or secondary best role, depending on what type of system that we have. Okay, we got game balance. Now this is based on the devs. Easier to balance heroes. I believe this to be true because you'll be able to see pick rates, whether it's based on bans or of course outside of the bans. Who are people picking? Right? What characters are being picked more than others, even when it comes to the ban system. So that way, again, we can level the playing field across the board a lot simpler. Because right now, like I said, we are in a chaotic gaming pool to where everybody's dang near overpowered, some more than others, but clearly we have a balancing issue, but that is another topic for another day. Um, and that was sitting at a 4.0. Okay, now we have player experience 3.5. Less arguing and character select 1000%. Because we all know at the end of the day, as soon as we see our names pop up, okay, this person plays this role, I play this role, they play that role, right? At that point, it's probably going to be more so based on character pick as far as a meta conversation. Because I do think that we have that conversation now, but it's definitely going to lead to like, well, why are you playing this character when this character is OP and you can play this character and it's just da, da. I understand that's probably going to be what happens, but at the end of the day, I do think it will lead to less arguing because again, tanks don't have to worry about being solo tanks anymore. We stick to the specific strategy in most cases of duelists, and now we have two strategists, right? I think a lot of people have an issue with triple support. That is something that will be resolved that most people won't have issues with anymore. So I do think that as far as the conversational pieces in the character select, some of those things will tone down a lot. Competitive integrity, 4.5, which I definitely think is really important, right? Better for ranked and competitive play, obviously, because again, it sets a standard across the board for each team. You know, at the very least, it's not going to be any randomness of worrying about triple support, solo tank, triple, quadruple DPS. You know what I mean? You know, it's going to be 2 on 2 on 2 on 2 on 2 on 2, right? We Who's going to be upset about that, right? Who is going to be upset about that? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be very skill based. Yes, we already spoke on character balance being a big crucial part to that. But at the end of the day, if everybody is as balanced as they should be, I don't see where the issues can be. Right, as far as like I said, where the characters are as far as power level and things of that nature. Right, because it will truly be based on who can utilize their characters the best, who can counter pick the best, and switch when it's time to, so that way it can help the team get the W's, right? And then we have structured gameplay, which is sitting at a 4, more consistent and organized matches. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is just overall, obviously, these are great pros. I don't think anybody will argue with these pros. Yes, there are certain variables that affect these pros, but for the most part, no, who can argue with this? This would be amazing, right? But the only difference is that underlying thing of the chaos and the freedom that we have currently, but at the same time, it is that chaos and freedom that is really hurting the game outside of just people just being toxic for no reason, racism. Y'all already know what I'm talking about, right? Outside of those things, with the cons that we're about to go over, I really think these are the best pros that you can ask for within the current state that we really need in Marvel Rivals. So let's hit at some of these cons. So longer queue times. Lord have mercy, we already know that's going to happen if this were to be implemented, right? Sitting at a 5. DPS queues can be very, very long. Heck, not even DPS queues. I feel even tank queues would be very, very long. But I do believe DPS queues would be first because DPS are going to be, well, yeah, I guess the DPS queues would be long because I mean it would be so many people that want to play DPS. Those roles would be filled. You would think rather quickly, but in the sense because they're filled rather quickly, that's honestly I feel what would cause it to take the longest, right? Because more people queue up for DPS than anything. So hopefully that makes sense. Um, with less flexibility, that's sitting at a 4, locked in from one role for the entire match. Now, depending on what type of system that we actually implement, that may not necessarily be a problem. Like on paper, just straight for what it is, yes, I get it. Right? Dang, this person sucks at DPS. I wish I could switch to DPS and we could switch to and they could switch to strategists. Now, maybe mid game, maybe there's something that you can do where you can send a request to switch or something like that. Who knows, right? Because devs can do what they want to do. But on paper, if it's just like any other system, right, you're pretty much locked in that entire match to said thing. Now, maybe going into the second round, right? Maybe you can swap between rounds. I think that would be a good idea, right? If you didn't do so well the first round, give somebody else a chance and y'all switch roles, right? I feel like that is very competitive. That's some communication there that will allow the team to make those adjustments as needed, right? I think that would be pretty cool. Less creativity kills off unique and off meta comps. So again, it kind of sucks because that's like the fun part and the free and chaotic part of the game where again you can run into 4 duelists, you can run into 3 strategies. Heck, you can run into 3 vanguards, right? People can just mix up the teams however they want and still be successful. But I think that is a small group of successful um gamers, right? As a community that come together and can pull things like that off, right? Not every team is going to be that successful. Like I said, at the end of the day, somebody has to lose and somebody has to win. But I do think that when people try to go too chaotic and too free and too creative, right, it ultimately it doesn't really do well for most teams, right? And I just think that's the honest truth. Role blame culture. So we already know tank diff, no heals, DPS diff. We already experienced that now. So to be honest with you, I really want to see that being too much different. Well, I say that bad. I do see where obviously it would escalate because then it would be like, man, why would you roll up for DPS if you don't know how to, or why would you pick strategists if you don't know how to? I can definitely see those things happening, right? But again, with the structure that comes with the game, if people are ultimately getting the roles that they want, I think it'll make up for itself because you might have those two duelists who could play at a high level to where they can make up for what the strategists lack or what the tanks lack, and vice versa. Strategists can make up for where the DPS, especially the way the game is right now, right? Strategists do a lot of damage. So again, these are things that kind of have to be seen. I'm not talking as if I just know that this is what's going to happen, but if implemented the right way, I do think there's ways where we can, remedy a situation like this. Where again, the conversation is okay, next round, we're just going to switch, right? Because if you lost the first round, and let's just say you could have switched in between, who says, you can't make the adjustment in the second round and either the results stay the same or they're better because you were able to make that adjustment, which would then take you to the third round, right? And then at that point, you would hope both teams would be able to acclimate, and ultimately, like I said, fight for the W. So the next one here, harder for flex players. That's a 3.5. Limited limits multi-role specialists. Now, that's why I said I do believe that they should have a flex option if they do enter this, but again, it goes back to the role lock, which is why I say, hey, you should still be able to switch in between rounds to put in that request to say, hey, you give me strategists, you take DPS or whatever the case may be, Vanguard to DPS, y'all get my point, right? If you implement something like that, that still keeps players in the game, right? And I think that is still very competitive because you're able to talk to your team and communicate and make those swaps. Now, obviously, are you going to have people that want to do that? Probably not. But I mean, clearly, we already have that issue right now, right? But at least with roll queue, guess what? You can only have so many tanks, you can only have so many DPS, and you can only have so many strategies. Now, whether a person can actually be good or not is a totally different conversation. But with that being said, you don't have this randomization of getting beat down by three vanguards, four DPS, three strategists, or whatever the other team may want to throw at you in this current state of the game, right? So I do think that it will help where if you have that one DPS that's just not wanting to do great, well, guess what? You can switch to that support or that strategist that could be a little bit better on damage to become that secondary DPS. Same thing for a tank, right? It really still will boil down to how they balance a lot of the characters in the game. But like I said, this could be something that Marvel Rivals needs to get, the community to work together a little bit better and stop a lot of the crazy chaos and BS that's going on amongst the players. Now, let's see, we have less adaptability. That's sitting at a 3.5. Harder to adjust if team needs something else. So that goes back to everything I kind of just said, right? Depending on what type of system we implement, then I think that's going to be on the players. We're going to have to work together. It is a team game. We barely can work together now in a freedom system. So with that being said, I think if you add a little bit more restriction, which is obviously the role queue, where you can only have two on two on two, right? Two vanguards, two duelists, two strategists. I think it will eliminate a lot of the current problems we have. So we're not going to speak too much on adaptability because we really already did that. And then we have can still have bad games, which is the 3.5. Roles balance and guaranteed role balances do not necessarily mean guaranteed wins, which is so true, right? So yes, you can still have bad games, but I do feel like this will prevent, a lot of throwing games from being that bad because people that just want to switch to a weird role or whatever the case may be that really throws off the whole I guess you would say momentum of the team in a sense, right? Because yeah, if you switch to Black Widow as a DPS, well, guess what? You don't have somebody that's switching to a third DPS, which could potentially throw off the whole chemistry. It doesn't, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it will throw off the chemistry. It could benefit the chemistry as well to make up for the lack of damage if somebody's trolling, for example. But I do feel like that structure at the end of the day is still going to hold true. You having those two tanks, you still having that DPS that wants to try, you still having, that strategist that still wants to try if the other strategist starts trolling for whatever reason, right? You queued up for those roles. And I also feels like it makes it easier to maybe even punish said players that decide they want to troll and do things like that, right? Because right now they can switch from DPS to strategist to tank. and it's just kind of like their stats are all across, all around the board, just bad, but they're bad in so many different places. I don't know how the Marvel Rivals team is able to determine whether or not they're trolling realistically or not. But I'm not in those offices, so I don't know. But I do feel like a system like this would make it very easy to point out, because why would you, be doing well on one character, then clearly something happens, and then you want to switch to another character, barely be able to heal, switching to Jeff, for example, eating your teammates and throwing them off the map. I think those things will become very easy to identify, if people wanted to throw games. So there y'all have it, right? I don't think this is a bad chart. I really do think this identifies a lot of the issues. I try to speak on these issues as best as I can. Again, this isn't to be the end all be all, right? I think it really just depends on what system we implement and how you implement it, because a lot of us can have great ideas, but I will always say the way you implement them is what's most important at the end of the day, right? So with that being said, again, do I want Road Q in the game? Not necessarily, but due to the player base that we have and the ways that a lot of these players interact with each other, I don't know. It makes me really feel like Road Q might be a good answer, right? Like I said, it all depends on how we implement it. You go into a game, or before you go into a game, you pick your main two primary roles you would like to play, or pick flex if you would like, so that way, at least you're guaranteed one of your two roles, right? So if you want DPS, hopefully you get it, right? If you want, or if you had tank as a secondary, hopefully you get that as well, right? And I think it just creates a better environment for people to move forward in their games and have less uh, toxic conversations, and ultimately push for better games to where what, these people actually played better than us. It wasn't just because we had this one person on the team that didn't want to work with us. Because don't get me wrong, you're probably still going to have those scenarios because they're going to be mad at the characters that you pick to play that don't necessarily help the characters that they want to currently play at the time. Those things are still going to happen. But for the most part, again, I do think it's going to bring us together more than separate us. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. But anyway, y'all, please let me know what you think. This is an open conversation, so that way we can see what other players think and we can just talk about it, right? That's all it is. Conversation. Let's talk about it. But with that being said, it is your boy Ranger, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.